Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first online bit of instruction. We're going to be picking up with Chapter 7, Information Processing. I hope everybody is remaining healthy during this process. This first section of 3 sections is devoted to the vagaries of memory and metacognition. One of the most controversial areas related to memories are so-called recovered memories. These typically emerge during psychotherapy sessions using hypnosis. Deeply buried memories are brought to the surface. Now I want to share 2 cases. A bright young man, in his 20s at this time, was surprised when his family received a letter from his former nanny. The young man came from a wealthy family, and there had been a notorious kidnapping attempt when he was a toddler. The nanny, newly hired by the family, had valiantly defended him, using her umbrella to beat off the attackers and calling for help to chase off the 2 would-be kidnappers. The kidnappers were never apprehended. The family was, as expected, enormously grateful and had rewarded the nanny not only with a secure position, but also a gold bracelet. In the letter, the nanny's daughter wrote that her mother had recently died and had made a deathbed confession. There had been no kidnapping attempt. She needed the job and liked the family. She thought that if they thought she had saved their child, she would be able to keep the position. She had beaten her umbrella against a tree and then raised the alarm. The daughter was letting them know what had really happened and was also returning the gold bracelet. Now, the young man was astonished. He had vivid memories of the kidnapping attempt, remembering both men, their efforts to remove him from his pram, the screams of the nanny. It had been a traumatic event that he had never forgotten, and yet it had never happened. The young man was Jean Piaget. The second case occurred in California in 1982. A parent reported a suspicion that her son had been abused while at daycare. Now, the police, in an ill-advised decision, sent home a letter to the 200-plus families that had children at the daycare, telling them that their child might have been molested at school, but to keep things quiet as this was an ongoing investigation. The children were interviewed. Many of them shared increasingly horrific stories, building up to being taken through tunnels to dig up coffins and stabbing corpses. They'd been forced to participate in animal sacrifice, culminating in sacrificing a baby. They'd had to drink blood. They shared being videotaped while playing naked cowboys. Now, none of the children could show anyone where these tunnels were. No tunnels were ever found. There were no reports of missing babies. There were no reports of desecrated graves. No videos ever surfaced. The children were reportedly medically examined, but actually the examination was only a brief interview. The primary evidence against the primary suspect, the owner's son, Ray Buckley, was that he possessed a graduation robe, a rubber duck, and some Playboy magazines. After 7 years, multiple and much money, including the life savings of many of the accused, many of the children began to recant their statements. They shared that the interviewer had scared them. And indeed, a number of inappropriate questioning and intimidation techniques had been used by the interviewer to get the children to confess to the abuse. One of the prosecuting attorneys told the child that that lady scared him too. The case was ultimately dropped for lack of evidence. Now, by the way, the original child whose mother had made the call to report the abuse, he was not allowed to testify. His father refused to allow the child. He refused to give consent. He shared that his ex-wife was crazy. He didn't want his child caught up in this circus. Now, the ex-wife, she did indeed have the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia from at least 2 psychiatrists. She was off her medication because it didn't go down well with her serious alcohol habit. While many of the victims are completely recovered and are doing fine, there have remained a few children who remain very convinced that they had been abused, that they had been made to participate in satanic rituals. Their memories feel very real, and they have been scarred by this history. The question now became, how easy is it to implant memories into a 4-year-old? So, a follow-up study with parent awareness and involvement and using healthy normal 4-year-olds was developed. This, by the way, is an example of a lab experiment. The children were accepted into the study if they had never been to a circus or been to the emergency room. Mom and Dad accompanied each child into a welcoming waiting room equipped with toy circus animals and medical kits, and they left the child alone. Once the child seemed comfortable, Dave, an affable grad student, came in, complained that he was so early, and began chatting with the child. At some point, depending on the toy choice, Dave would ask the child, "Have you ever been to the circus? Have you ever been to the emergency room?" 100% of the children said no. So they then talked about what it would be like to go to one of these places. What might you see and do? And in no time at all, they were taming lions or suturing up a bad cut. A week later, Mom and Dad and child returned, and again the child was left alone. Dave, again, came in early and renewed his acquaintance with the child. At some point, Dave would say, "I remember last week how you told me about that time you went to the circus, or you told me about that time you had to go to the emergency room." 1 in 4 children agreed, and they displayed vivid memories of the event. Even when their parents tried to debrief and correct the faulty memory, the children remained convinced that it had happened. Well, I know what you're thinking. These are 4-year-olds. A few peeps shy of an Easter basket. Given time, you could convince them of just about anything. So, the experiment was repeated with Psychology 101 college freshmen. Families were interviewed. A student was accepted into the study if they had never been on a balloon ride. They were told that they were participating in a memory experiment and presented with pictures from their past. They were asked to recall as much as they could about the events shown in the pictures. Now, through the miracle of Photoshop, embedded in the stack of pictures of birthdays, Christmases, school graduations, etc., was a picture of the student on a balloon ride. And again, 1 in 4 remembered the balloon ride. Our memories are not as good as we would like to think they are. They can be created from nothing, changed over time, and in general are not to be trusted. You can say what you remember. The memory is, after all, real, but it may not be a memory of something that actually happened. Now, just for fun, we did a memory experiment in this class. These were the most recalled words. Note the word sleepy. Now, this is a list of words that were presented. Notice the one word that's not on the list, although it is always one of the most recalled words. As I've said before, memory functioning begins to slip as we get older. Declarative or explicit memory is much more fragile than procedural or implicit memory. No surprises here. We do better with our memory when we have good health, we have awareness of our own memory functioning, and we have an array of things we can do to help ourselves. The next topic is metacognition. It's our understanding of how our mind works. It includes your insight on how well you did on an activity, how well you know what you know and what you don't know. If you ask an elementary school child how they did on a test, they will often say they don't know. They haven't got the test back yet. But sometime around middle school, many of us can say we did well or poorly. We can perhaps even recall specific items that we weren't sure of. This improvement in metacognition functioning is right in line with maturation that occurs in the prefrontal lobe of the brain. This is the end of Chapter 7, Section 1. The next episode will be for Chapter 7, Section 2, Learning Strategies.